evening, mi gente. This is Ray Collazo, and you're watching and listening to the Found in Translation Talk Show, the longest-running independent Latino-led news talk podcast that stacks truth about politics and today's hottest issues. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining this very special, this really month-long celebration, but specifically this week, we are celebrating the 7th anniversary of the Found in Translation Talk Show. For my loyal listeners, you remember we started very humbly 7 years ago on Easter Sunday as Ray's podcast, and now the brand has evolved to the Found in Translation Talk Show, which has evolved beyond a podcast into a radio show, which you can hear at 106.5 WPPMLP Philadelphia, as a video talk show, live wherever you're watching this on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and for the first time ever, unless my producer tells me different, you're watching this on IG Live at Ray Collazo _speaks. Truly a historic week here on Found in Translation. And as we have the historical Philadelphia in the background, who better to stack some truth about politics, let people know what's going on, than my newest co-host, political commentator and organizer, calling in from paradise in the 407, Zoe Colon. Welcome back to Found in Translation.
Hey, Ray, congratulations on your anniversary. Thanks for having me again.
Well, really appreciate that, Zoe. You have only in your second appearance, you've already brought a lot of excitement, a lot of zest to the show, and we're going to have a great conversation. Zoe, why don't you, there's two things. First of all, I want to let people know, some people are watching because at 8:30 on the nose, Zoe has a very big announcement about the celebrity guest that will be joining us on Thursday. They're all celebrities, but we got a true A-lister that's going to be our headline act on Thursday night's extravaganza. We got talented actors, singers, musicians, spoken word artists, and many other types of talents from people coast to coast, LA, New York, everywhere in between, Miami. We got a big shot that's going to be on the show, and particularly want to highlight. So at 8:30, I will text Zoe. She doesn't even know who this is yet, even though she has her suspicions. I will text Zoe, and she will have the honor of announcing our very special guest. So please hang in at 8:30, but you're going to want to watch the whole show. There's a lot going on here today. Zoe, how are you hanging? Before we introduce our new friend to the show, our very special guest, let people know how's things going on in Central Florida during this very amazing time in our history.
Well, taking it day by day, we're seeing that 1/3 of the cases in Central Florida are Latino, right? So gearing up for that, responding. I'll be talking a little later about one of the initiatives happening now. There's a collaborative between a few organizations that are Puerto Rican or Latino-led. We launched a website in Spanish with a centralized kind of resource database. And we also mailed out a newsletter to the hardest hit community in Orange County, which is Azalea Park, which tends to be low income and Puerto Rican and Hispanic. Yes,
and we're very excited to be getting some updates from Central Florida. Of course, your governor has a very interesting relationship with sort of the truth and reality of science, what's going on here. So education and informing our community what's going on, and particularly the most vulnerable, is a big part of the show. So, Zoe, we're going to have a discussion later in the show about a subject very dear to your heart. And our very special guest is going to be part of the whole show. But in particular, you brought her on to engage in that very important conversation. So why don't you introduce our very special guest?
Yep. So later in the show, we'll be providing a deep dive review of Nicky Jam's new Netflix docuseries, El Ganador. And we'll be discussing the power of the African-American Latino coalition building initiatives or areas for opportunities. And I'd like to introduce my colleague. We work together at UCF, Dr. DeShawn Chapman. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. DeShawn, we really appreciate you joining the show. And why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the work you do in Central Florida and why you felt it was important to be part of this beginning of a series of very important conversations for our shared communities.
Absolutely. So I have been an educator for going on 15 years right now, and I work with youth in foster care and youth who have experienced poverty and trauma. So I continue that work now in Central Florida, and I do educational programming in historically African-American community. And so I think that our work really aligns with what we're going to discuss today, because it's all about knowing that, problems in education aren't just the issues of educators. They are the issues of folks who work in housing, in healthcare, in transportation. And that if we work collectively on these issues, then we can have more success than we can ever have independently. And so that's really exciting work to be engaged in.
Well, Doctor, we're very fortunate to have you on the show. But we're going to talk about the power of Black and Latino coalition building in a second. But I did want to give people just sort of a general update on this COVID-19 season. We unfortunately have, I believe, officially now, even though we know it's a conservative estimate, at least 1 million Americans that have been confirmed infected by this terrible virus. We have over 60,000 people that have tragically passed away, including a disproportionate amount of people from our communities, and really no end in sight. Obviously, there's a call by some parts of our country to sort of open up and sort of, hey, if people die, but we got to get the economy going. Many of us, the majority of us, a little more clear-headed and focus more on the well-being of our loved ones, need to see some more evidence that we're in a position to do that, because it doesn't appear to be the case. So why don't we just get you in this conversation? I mean, as an educator and someone that's an advocate for our community in the South, and one of the states that's sort of ground zero for this debate about how we deal with this, just your thoughts about where we're at in this process, because it's hitting us all hard, but in minority communities, it is so acute, and sort of in the middle of all this, in the middle of a health crisis and a political battle at the same time.
Yeah, Ray, you mentioned, maybe those of us who are a little more level-headed, are inclined to open up more slowly. But I don't know if it's that we're more level-headed or we're more connected to the issue. And we're more connected to individuals that are contracting and dying of this disease. It seems that, the narrative about COVID kind of shifted when folks started hearing about, who's actually dying, who's most impacted by COVID. And, from an educational perspective, you have health and economic disparities that are impacting our community, and it's really impacting students educationally. I was on a call today and we were talking about how, once it was announced that in our community, schools wouldn't open up again this year, how students stopped logging on the computer. Right. And only maybe a third of students weren't logging on before. So the educational impacts are going to be deep. And when you also look at Hurricane Katrina, the aftermath of that didn't necessarily impact, seniors who were excited about graduating. Oh, not to discount that, because we do feel for them. But the real educational impact was in the early learning and primary grades, because these are students that miss a year of schooling. So, I think that those are things when we talk about coalition building that we need to really consider that's impacting both of our communities.
No,
yeah,
and Zoe.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to that it really elevates the issue of disparities in our communities. And, I come from up north, and, yes, our worlds collided, but they integrated a lot more than so. And so I just, it comes natural to me to think about our community as Black and brown and how we can work together. And when you look at the disparities, I can't help but think about mass incarceration and voter protection and all these other issues that disproportionately affect our communities, the Black and brown communities. And so it's just another opportunity, if you will, as this sheds light again on how we're disproportionately affected. It's another opportunity for us to kind of, come together, especially in the South, in places where I feel, and DeShawn, Dr. Chapman, is a native of Orlando. And so she can speak to this much more than I am. I'm a transplant, but my experience has been that I just don't see the kind of coalition building that I saw in New York, right? And so it's, we work together in a historically African-American community in our roles at UCF. And so, I've gotten to know her, and I know that she's passionate about these issues. But I'm wondering, I'd love to hear how you think we could work together, on this issue, and then, continue to kind of ride the coattails, if you will, to, when it comes to election cycle, how to build capacity in our community and to identify similarities and similar experiences so that we can, join forces.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point about the coalition building. When you approached me to talk about this topic, I really had to stop and think about the opportunities that I have had to be engaged in coalitions, and there are few, very few. So I definitely think, that is the move going forward. But from colonial times, laws in this country have been used to secure power for some and to disenfranchise others. So coalition building, coalescing individuals, organizations, businesses around a common goal can bit by bit increase our power base. And we can go after policies that negatively impact the quality of our lives. I kind of think about it as a tree, right? Like you have the leaves and branches, and then you have the roots. And I think in communities of color, communities like ours, we utilize the social sector. So we do education and empowerment programming. And those are your leaves and your branches, right? And they do bear a little bit of fruit. But to get at the root, to look at the quality of soil, that's the policy. And that's what coalition building can help us get to.
And you're absolutely right. It's not coincidental. This is by design, right? Divide and conquer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the more that we feel in our respective communities that we're in somehow, some ways competing with one another, even thinking about diversifying faculty at the university, it's always framed as at the expense of another, right? Versus like being proactive about diversifying staff across the board. So I agree. And can you imagine if we came together, went up to Tallahassee every year, right? I mean, the impact that would have on policy. And again, that power building that's so important in a state like Florida. So yes, I agree.
And we've seen the potential, right? So like, there's a lot of local examples of this. When I was a little boy, I remember being a big deal in the 80s when a lot of the major cities in this country were electing their first black mayors. Chicago, Philadelphia, New York. David Dinkins, will you please be my mayor? You remember that line. And Latinos at that point, because of the demographics, were really sort of strong enough and politically powerful enough to be helpful in a black coalition, but not necessarily strong enough to sort of stand on their own. So there was a sort of a good melding of timing there. One of the things now that happens, fast forwarding now into 2020, is that we not only have examples where, thinking about the 2008, the Obama elections, that was like the most obvious example was when we work together, right? Like great things can happen. But we still have a long way to go because, there's a conversation happening now where essentially you can argue not only several African-American, primarily women, are campaigning to be Biden's VP.
Right.
But also the Latino community saying, hey, why couldn't we have a Senator Cortez Masto? Why couldn't we have a Julio? Well, it's not going to be Julian now because he's a guy. But my point is like, we're jockeying for power here on some levels. And there's a balance, right? Because I think we have to be competition and, that desire to build power within our own communities is real and fair, but it has to be done in a spirit of, okay, whether Stacey gets the spot, whether Kamala gets the spot, whether Catherine Cortez gets the spot, we're going to do that. We're going to have a unified agenda, right? And I'm not saying that's easy, and that's on the top end of it, but those are the kind of conversations that we have to have with each other because, at one point, sometimes it's easy to build the coalitions because it's obvious, right? One of the other groups is a swing vote in a community. But when we're comparable, as we are demographically now, it's really incumbent upon us to say, okay, no matter if it's a Latino or an African-American in a certain position of power, we're going to have a unified agenda. Dr. DeShawn, talk to me about that because what the policies and the commonalities that we have, and I'm just thinking about this education piece you brought up, which is like, Wi-Fi access and access to this online education in this emergency situation. is such an obvious issue. It's impacting us so deeply.
It is. And I think that, there have always been divides. While you were, talking, I think about, how we've been divided based on colorism within our own communities. How, history tells us that during the time when race really became an issue, that there were opportunities for poor white people and Black people to work together. But to create that divide, race became, a major factor. So I think that that's something that's always used to keep us separate. And I hope that we're able to rise above that, because in addition to politics, there are a lot of issues that, impact both communities. I'm thinking about, in particular, the school to prison pipeline, these zero tolerance policies that we have in school that are leading to our Black and brown boys and girls interfacing with the criminal justice system. You mentioned technology. It reminded me of the work I do with youth in foster care, who, because of various policies at group homes, it prevents them from engaging in Zoom. And these days, that's all we do, right? And that too disproportionately impacts kids of color, particularly when they're older kids in foster care.
And I know, Zoe, you want to jump in this conversation, but I want to speak to that point, Doctor, because, and this is kind of one of the big themes of this whole situation, is that when we started, we've been, obviously immigration is a major issue. The wealth gap is a major issue. We've been advocating for years and years. Part of the message was, okay, if where is the line? Because if you think you can, if somebody's in jail, if African-American jail, they probably did something wrong anyway. Mm-hmm. And then, you sort of allow that dehumanization. And look, our jails shouldn't, forget this issue. Our jails are some of the least humane in the world, right? So just the theory of why we focus on punishment than reconciliation or remediation is really based in racism in this country, because we see that as a place where Black men get punished and not about, another theory of change. And then this issue of how how all of our folks are being treated on the southern border, which, by the way, not an insignificant amount of Black immigrants are part of that group as well.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then when we talk about these issues, and then income inequality, which impacts a whole lot of white folks. Mm-hmm. And now the challenge is that now Puerto Rico happens. Well, it's like Puerto Rico, whatever.
They're over there.
They probably did it to themselves. Yeah, I heard they said something about the elected officials, and there was one, a couple of mayors did something wrong, so it's their fault, right? So now it's on everybody. And now our seniors are being impacted. Now, now our folks on the front lines, our healthcare workers, some of them in the professional class are not being treated this way. So the point is that when you allow division to dehumanize some of us, it's just a matter of time until you're going to get impacted by it.
I want to add to that. When I applied for the job to work in Paramore, knowing that it was a historically Black neighborhood, I had second thoughts. I kind of doubted myself, and I'm like, am I going to be seen am I going to be validated as someone who can identify with that experience? And, up until I applied for that job, my trajectory in Orlando had been exclusively with the Latino community, right? I came with Hispanic Federation, and I worked with Alianza for Progress and some other organizations, mostly Latino led. And I actually, I had several options, and this was not the highest paying one, and definitely not the highest ranking title, if you will. But I did it very intentionally because I wanted to diversify my portfolio as far as my work with communities of color in Orlando. And I did that very intentionally, again, purposely, because I wanted to show, that I'm very interested in this community and that I'm passionate about all people, high potential communities in need, underserved. And also just because, again, coming from up north, sometimes I feel like I live in the twilight zone when I'm, here in Central Florida, because it feels like we're 10, 20 years behind what has transpired up north, right? In terms of like building power in communities of color. And so, I haven't come across many opportunities, but I know when Andrew Gillum was running for office, for example, like there were a ton of groups called Boricuas for Gillum, and I tried to promote that as much as possible. But there's just so much education that's needed. Even within our community, you spoke to colorism. Within our community, there's definitely colorism, but also like immigrants, versus folks with citizenship, right? And having the Puerto Rican community, which is the largest base here in Central Florida, really empathize and support issues around immigration. So we have all these different factors dividing our communities. And because this is a relatively newly arrived community and a fast growing Hispanic community in Central Florida, we just haven't found those points, right, of the similar interests, right, or we haven't been proactive enough in uniting those communities. So it's very obvious to me, right, income inequality, health disparities. It's very, very obvious to me. Amendment 4 was another time when we kind of came together, right? So, I was invited to some event and, I was asked to speak in Spanish about mass incarceration and the impact that this was not just a Black issue, right? The fact that could not restore their right to vote after being in prison. And so, that was the beginning of something good. And I hope that we will continue, to expand on those, collaboratives and those initiatives, but it's simply not enough. It's simply not enough. And as you can see, we're in a, quasi, if not, more overtly like conservative state. And I just feel like there's just so much work to be done. And that's why I thought this issue was really important. And I'm so happy that Dr. Chapman is with us. I think we do what we can in the higher education space and K-12 space, but we definitely need to do more around policy, as you were saying, and definitely with this election cycle, we need to bring our people out. Biden hasn't done right by the Latino community under the Obama administration, right, with mass deportations, the highest in modern history. So the Latino community doesn't forget that, right? But it seems that Biden is a favorable candidate in the African-American community based on polls. Right. And primaries. So we have to find a point of interest, for both communities to unite on this.
You're listening to Zoe Colon and Dr. DeShawn Chapman on Founding Translation Talk Show. We're going to make our very special announcement in a couple of minutes. I know some people are logging in. They're like, we want to know who this A-lister is going to be on the show Thursday. And then before and after Dr. Chapman, we'll continue this conversation. But before we make this announcement, I did want to bring it back just for a second on, sort of the national conversation here. First of all, public service now for my people. Fabuloso is all that, but it can't solve everything. So for those that may have only caught a bit of a headline, please don't do anything with detergent you normally wouldn't do. Please. Hey, we're laughing, but hundreds of people have called state governments around the country saying, should they do this? So, this is the power of the pulpit. And unfortunately, when people have these platforms and when they're obviously unqualified and are really menaces, it can cause real problems. And I wanted to share this before you make this announcement, Zoe, because, making light of this situation, but that's not funny. But right before we went on air, the Trump administration announced that basically any state that's got a quote unquote sanctuary city is going to have to give up those undocumented immigrants or they're not getting any more funding for COVID-19. So, that's extortion. That's illegal. But also the fallacy of this, because it's all talk, right? Because what have we found out in the last few weeks? Oh, if it wasn't for immigrant and Latino and minority workers in chopping up pigs and chickens and picking fruit and picking tobacco in the South, and you wouldn't have an economy. Our economy would collapse. And I don't got to tell y'all, I was down there and a friend of ours, who's a mutual friend of us three, was like, I was down there in December and they were like, you know what? When he announced all that stuff, all the Orange Grove people and the people at Disney called the office. Yo, you need to chill that out. You can't. We need our Haitians. We need our Colombians. We need our Dominicans. We need our Caribbean people working, and working for these lower wages, not complaining. Yo, you ain't deport nobody down here. So it's so much talk, but these are the things that are used to try to divide the Black and Latino community, right? He's messaged that all the time. Oh, this subtly, not so subtly. Say, hey, these undocumented Latinos, take away from your jobs, African Americans, and vice versa. So these are the kind of themes, and I think the country largely is understanding now how ridiculous this guy is, and we'll see how that plays out with the election. But all there's left, and all there really has been, is hate. So we're going to see an uptick. We got to defend. I want to make sure we shout out our Asian American brothers and sisters, because it's very important that Black and Latinos stand there with them and say, we can't have these hate crimes against these people. You talk about the last people we need to be messing with right now. You don't got a healthcare system without Asian American brothers and sisters. Try to do this without them right now. And the anti-immigrant fervor. I mean, I tweeted it the other day. I said, when's he going to start blaming us for this? Sure enough. Now all this nonsense with immigrants. Dr. Chapman, got a quick comment on that before we get to our very special announcement?
Yeah, just real quick. I felt like what you just announced, I saw it coming a couple of days ago when he announced that, the border was going to be closed, immigration is shut down. I thought, here we go. No
doubt about it. Christina Vega, who will be, who's one of our regular co-hosts, who will be on Thursday's very special show. Christina Vega breaks it down on the Facebook chat. Unfortunately, all we hear is just talk, his team, and he enjoy hearing themselves speak. Even if they make no sense, sadly, they have such a great following. Mm-hmm. Too many folks are listening. So this is what we're going to do. And I appreciate everyone watching and listening to this edition of the Found Translation Talk Show. Dr. Chapman, I know these very studious women, they email me, they want to do all this prep. And then when they get on and they realize just a conversation with some good people, it's easy. So we appreciate your contribution. Of course, Zoe, you're part of the family. So this is what we're going to do, folks. So just review. Thursday, this special episode here. Zoe's Sound Off Tuesday episodes. Thursday, our weekly show, 7th anniversary. Doc Chapman, you got to watch.
I will.
I got piano, prodigies, young boys. I got rappers. My nephew gonna rhyme, gonna spit. I got singers of all genres. I got comedians. I got spoken word artists. I got animators. I mean, we're gonna have cartoons on this thing. There's gonna be some heavy duty stuff. New York, I got Hollywood actresses doing stuff. Chicago, we're gonna break this down. And we're trying. So on this show, it's gonna be from 8 to 10 o'clock Eastern, 2-hour extravaganza. Okay. This weekend, I say, you know what? I got a great lineup, but I mean, could I ask so and so to do this? And then I called LB. I said, LB, should I DM? We're not kind of friends. Could he do it? Yeah, why not? What do you got with this? And this gentleman came through in a clutch. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do this on the private chat we got here, Zoe, because my phone is occupied right now.
I was wondering. I'm like, is he really going to text me or is like?
No, what I'm going to do is I'm going to. So close your eyes because. So I'm going to put it up there. And then Zoe is going to announce who our very special celebrity guest is going to be. Who's going to be the headline act for Found in Translation's Talent Showcase.
Can I open them up?
No, not yet. I was actually going to put it on the Facebook thing. No, I got to put it in the private chat. Then everyone knows before you do, and that would have been right. All right, hold on. Actually, don't say nothing, Doctor. You can see it. Don't say nothing.
I won't. I've got your drum roll. I'm supporting you with the drum roll.
All right, Zoe, let people know who's going to be on it Thursday. Girl, look.
Frankie Negron.
Frankie Negron, salsa superstar. And a friend to the show, Frankie Negron, is going to perform live.
Okay.
Found Translation from his bungalow in Miami. And if you follow Frankie Negron, I encourage everyone to follow Frankie on social media. He's been singing and sharing and he's been on Broadway. He's sung all over the world. Very successful artist. And Frankie is a good guy, very involved in Latino advocacy, very woke cat. As you can see from his social media, very aware of what's going on. So he wanted to be a part of the show for many levels. And I want to thank Frankie personally for agreeing to do this. Again, he doesn't have to do this. He's truly an A-lister. I also wanted to announce, I think you're going to like this one too, Dr. Chapman. That's why you got to watch Thursday. Okay. The gentleman who is Alicia Keys' percussionist. Her main percussionist that plays drums, congas, all the African drums on her, and timbales on her band that she tours with all over the world. A gentleman named Pablo Batista is also going to perform in the show. So we're going to have Alicia Keys, drummer, is going to break it down on the show. He's won Grammy, he's been a part of Grammys, jazz, Latin jazz. So we're going to have it's going to be quite.
Ray, you're getting fancy on us.
And I even got others that I haven't announced yet. We got some chances. We may have another surprise or two, but follow us on social media. The other thing that's really cool about it is that, and for people that are watching this on IG, please leave your comments because the show will actually also be live streamed on Instagram at Ray Collazo _speak. So if you have friends that are more on the IG side of things, now they're too young for Facebook, let them know they can watch us on IG. So that's what's going on.
I was like, wait, we're not going to talk about old and young, right?
Well, some of us are diverse. What can I say?
By the way, Ray, I don't know if you know this, but Frankie Negron sang, he did the remake of Hector Lavoe's Que Cante Mi Gente, and he turned it into Que Vote Mi Gente, and we had a huge campaign a few years back mobilizing the Puerto Rican community using his voice.
Absolutely. No, Frankie's been involved for a long time, and we're happy to have him on the show. So before we get into this deep dive, because I know we have some people that want to tune at 8:30, not only for the announcement, want to hear us talk a little bit about Nicky Jam's El Ganador Netflix docuseries. Doctor, wanted to make sure we finish up this conversation right. So let us know. I mean, look, that's a whole show in of itself. I mean, we're going to keep bringing you back to talk about how we work together, but just leave us some final thoughts, because this really was sort of a primer for the set of conversations we want to continue to have on Founded Translation with you and Zoe.
My final thought is just really that it's possible. In 2012, I went to Botswana, Africa, and the professor who was hosting us was of the Collazo people. And at the time, they believed that their people were not adequately represented in the educational curriculum, right? So what do? They build a coalition. They bring together people in different sectors. They advocate for inclusion. They write the curriculum, right? And they're in a different place 8 years from now. So I look forward to not only continuing the conversation, but, working with you, Zoe, in the Central Florida communities to get some of this work done.
Awesome. Zoe, give us some final thoughts around, what I want you to share, Zoe, is why do you think, for people that are watching this that are like, yeah, that makes sense. We're generally down with that. But why do you think it's important for our activist community to really focus on this piece if they haven't done so already?
So powerful. We have so many common interests. We have so much to learn from one another. And, I feel like we allow others to tell our story in the way that they find useful for whatever their politics are or their agenda is, right? And so we need to take that narrative back. We need to tell our own story, and we need to be proactive in how we want to be seen and what we're going to do to change our community.
Hey, listen to Zoe Colon, watching and listening to Zoe Colon and Dr. DeShawn Chapman on Founded Translation. And now this is one of our favorite segments here on the show is Boricua News. So me and Zoe always figure out some, because I'd say just the Puerto Rican stuff, the pop culture, the cheese man, the politics, it's a whole other show in and of itself. But we always try to set aside something that we don't normally get to on Thursdays. Normally Thursday shows, which tend to be a little more news oriented. But one of the things that we wanted to talk about, which a lot of people are buzzing about, is the the Netflix just dropped a docuseries, El Ganador, which chronicles sort of autobiographically Nicky Jam's life. Not only his career, but his personal life. Nicky Jam is one of the biggest artists in the world, not just in the música urbana genre, but I mean, he's a global guy's in Fast and Furious movies. He's humongous. And I know I learned a lot. Turns out it came out 6 months ago, but only in Latin America, Netflix.
Right.
So some of our friends had already gotten the bootleg version or went to DR and saw it or something, but I had never seen it. Let me tell you, Zoe, I guess the first thing I want to put out there is, I think the best thing I can say about it is, it was 6.5 hours, and I could have watched 6.5 hours more. The combination between the quality of the production, the realness of it, and just the compelling story, it was really good. So, give us your first thoughts about this docuseries.
Well, to your point, it was real. It was definitely real. In some cases, for me, it was hard to watch. It really highlights kind of the crack cocaine, heroin epidemic in urban communities on the state side, and in Puerto Rico in the 80s and 90s. So it was hard to watch because I have some personal experiences, with similar households, and in my community, it was rampant. It was hard to watch because, again, like what he yearned for as far as like his mother's love and having that person in his life. And I think of all the single parent households, right? And there's so much more that we can talk about. I don't know if you want to get into the weeds, but yeah, I mean, it was hard to watch. There were times when I was just, so excited about the music and proud, right? That we are kind of the pioneers of reggaeton, right? And what reggaeton for me represents in our community is very similar to what hip hop represents to the African-American community. It's an outlet for our politics, for our experiences as an oppressed people. So there's just so many dimensions to that docuseries, on a personal level, thinking about, if you're analyzing these issues from a sociological perspective, there's just so much to talk about. drug abuse and crime on the island, which is very much the reason why people, come to the stateside. And, it also kind of highlighted the cyclical migration historically between Puerto Rico, the island, and stateside, and for various reasons, right? Hey, I had a cousin, I have a lot of cousins, so you can't tell who it is, but I had a cousin who came because he witnessed the murder, and came over and stayed with me for some time. So yeah, I mean, it was real, and, it hit home for me because I have personal experiences with a lot of those issues.
So many, God, there's so many pieces of the onion to peel.
I said we could spend the whole show talking about
and maybe, in a couple of our buddies, I'm thinking about Felicita and Chrissy. If a couple of our buddies want to do a deep dive, I'm down with doing a whole set of shows on it.
Yeah.
Y'all could just talk. I'll produce it. Because there is a lot to it. I think the first thing is that it really is, first of all, aside of the technical side, it's very well done. And everyone did a good job, from Jesse Torrero, the celebrated Dominican New York director, done a lot of the hip hop videos, Latino videos, and now movies and short films. The quality of they spent tens of millions of dollars. It's equivalent of 3 movies, in terms of time, and it's very well done. So on that part, just kudos. It was real. From the diaspora experience, the biculturalism, the Puerto Rican Dominican mix,
right?
The street life and PR, the poverty leads you to these making no good choices, right? Because at one point his dad, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a lot of people putting these, either you're screwed or you're screwed. And so, because of poverty, it leads you to some choices that normally people, it's like his dad, who came off like a very good guy on the thing. But the thing is, it is the Puerto Rican tragedy in many ways that Hector Lavoe and other salsa stars of his generation went through.
Right. And these are issues that still impact our community today, right? If you can make more money selling cocaine on the corner, or, marijuana, whatever it is, then at a minimum, salary or minimum wage job, and you have to feed your family, what are you going to select? Right. And so that's real. And so I'm glad that, you can see that the dad is, nurturing and loving, and still had to make some hard choices, right? It kind of helps us understand how people get to that point, right? People like you and I. And so again, I have very similar experiences in my family. And, it's why I'm passionate about what I do. But yeah, I love that you can see that aspect of it. Again, the importance of music, right? The same way, again, it is in the African-American community. Music as an outlet for, kids from the street, if you will, kids that didn't see, didn't have positive role models. There was drugs everywhere around Nicky Jam. Right, everywhere,
and violence and guns,
you
and
see
just that mentality. This kind of obviously, yeah, it's not. I'm sure some of it was a little exaggerated, but man, I wouldn't want to live in why would you want to live in Puerto Rico? That lawlessness. How many people got shot and that never happened? Nobody went to court. Nobody got arrested. And let me tell you, Nicky was blessed by an angel. How many bullets? How many situations did he put himself in? He shouldn't be here.
I honestly don't even think there was much exaggeration. I think that's the reality of, I remember being in St. Thomas on vacation, and we met some folks from the Coast Guard, and he was like, Puerto Rico at that point, this was 6 years ago, was in the top 3 as far as per capita murder rates, top 3 in the world globally. And so this is a real issue, violence in our community. And we started to talk a little bit about the church. And you can see his dad, getting involved, or, meeting someone from the church. And again, we could spend a whole show on this, right? But this is the saving grace for a lot of communities, right? The more conservative your church is, or, your environment is, the more likely you are to save your family from this violent environment. And so that's real. And, so I honestly don't think that a lot of that was exaggerated at all. And I think that this impacts our community right now in Puerto Rico.
No. And I wanted to bring Dr. Chapman back on because I'm thinking about from a historical perspective, it was so interesting. And I want to give a shout out to my millennials and my Generation Z watching and listening to this, because y'all need to, even the historical track of this music genre that y'all have never known anything different is really interesting, because I was a little boy when hip hop kind of started, and so you can tell the parallels of that trajectory and hip hop essentially starting as a local art form in New York, and the only difference was the Bronx versus Brooklyn and Harlem versus
Queen.
Queens, right? I mean, that it was basically a local genre for almost a decade until the West Coast guys and a few other people got involved, and then it international. In the same way that Daddy Yankee and Nicky Jam and Dago and Playero and those original guys in the mid '90s, literally, were like birthing this evolution of the genre. Obviously, I had General and Vico C, and we can go into some of that history. But my point is, like, at that point, it was basically local artists creating a local genre, but that now penetrates the whole world the way English language hip hop does, regardless of the language you speak, because these guys now are big in all over the world, because it's really speaking to that urban, hopelessness, and that connects with people on a street level, on a personal level of their ups and downs, whether they speak English, Spanish, French, Farsi, what have you. So the parallels, and I don't know, Doctor, you're too young for this, but I couldn't think of a hip on the music side. So basically Nicky and Daddy Yankee were together, and I knew that, but I didn't really know that. I learned a lot about stuff. So imagine now if 15 years ago the two biggest guys broke up, and then 15 years later they're both still big. And so I think the closest we could get to it on the English language hip hop side would be when Ice Cube left NWA.
Okay.
I think that'd probably be the closest one. But that wasn't just two guys. That was a bunch of people. And quite honestly, yeah, Ice Cube had a big hip-hop career, but then he got into movies. These guys just, the longevity is really interesting. So, Zoe, what give us another thought about what impacted you. Obviously, the redemption story was incredible because he made a comeback on a whole lot of levels.
So I've always noticed, and of course, this is not based on any scientific study or anything like that, but I've noticed in Puerto Rico, that my cousins that are lighter skinned, they're the rockeros. They listen to rock, right? And they're the surfer kind of guy. And then my darker skinned cousins, were the reggaetoneros, right? And they tended to be involved in, criminal activity, if you will. And they identified with the reggaeton kind of movement because it validated their experiences in a lot of different ways. And I think that's, an accurate reflection of what hip hop was, to the Black community and Puerto Rican community, in New York and beyond. And so, that's my observation that, race and ethnicity plays into it as well, right? In your experience, as a low income person of color versus, maybe someone with more resources, who's a surfer in Puerto Rico and listens to, alternative rock or rock. And so that's just an observation. But I also thought that it was interesting that Nicky Jam kind of found respite in Colombia, right? In a completely different country. And that he felt appreciated there, versus Puerto Rico. So, I just think there's some layers to they're a little controversial, right? But you almost feel like, wow, like he didn't feel supported by his own people, for a lot of different reasons. Daddy Yankee was really at the top of the charts until today. Daddy Yankee is like the most revered,
But Nicky's up there too now, right? So it's like,
he is
Jordan,
like untainted, like no one ever messes with him, right? But it's just interesting that I think they're getting back together. Actually, they're coming back together as Los Ganges, which I'm dying to see. But yeah, I thought it was interesting that he felt more supported outside of his home country or a country that he, obviously identifies with versus, Puerto Rico. So
that's that you spoke to some real important points there, Zoe, because that can kind of be also going back to earlier conversation, like one of the bright sides of coalition building is that I don't think I really understood or started to understand my value in terms of as an organizer and as a leader until I got out of the East Coast and started working with both African Americans that didn't necessarily grow up with Latinos the way we did, or non-Puerto Rican or non-Caribbean Latinos. And like, kind of being Puerto Rico was novel, or you start with a clean slate, and these aren't people that grew up with you or have any, judgments on who you're going to be because of where you grew up and your culture and the city neighborhood you grew up in. And then to the point around, there was a lot of, if you were paying it close attention, there's a lot of subtle colorism that's within the docuseries, right? So like at one point, there's this neighborhood and there's this guy in this neighborhood that wants Nicky dead. And so basically he goes to Daddy Yankee's neighborhood to hide. And now Daddy Yankee, if people know the backstory, Daddy Yankee, Puerto Ricans don't think of it this way, but essentially he's kind of like a biracial guy because his father's side, the Ayala family, are the Black Puerto Rican family that are some of the major bomberos, Bombay Plena, and they're very known as a very prominent in music in local Puerto Rican music, Afro Puerto Rican family. His mom's light skinned, and he looks in the middle. So, but he basically grew up in a blackish part of Santurce, one of the poor areas, and at one point Nicky's hiding there. And basically they say, those knuckleheads in Sabana Seca ain't coming over here. And there's sort of a subtext to, they're not coming to the blacker neighborhood. They may be tough guys over there, but they ain't coming over here. So there's some dynamics there. And look, I mean, the reality is this, is that part of the reason, let's keep it real, that a lot of these Puerto Rican, not all, because some are black or more obvious Afro-Boricuas and Afro-Latinos, Osuna and Don Omar and a few of them. But part of the reason that Puerto Ricans have this ability to make these very, whether it's salsa or pop, these very mainstream music genres, is that, we sort of are enough of color to sort of have the flavor, but can kind of mainstream it. And that's been part of, and it's sort of, again, a subtle thing. Nicky's the pretty boy. Nicky's the pretty guy in the rap game, if you will, right? And Daddy sort of plays that role too. So there's a lot of subtleties to it you got to be paying attention to. I thought his relationship with women was very interesting, Zoe, because, he's trying to connect with his mom. That's really the biggest theme of the show, reconnect. And I don't want to spoil it for people, but they should watch it. But then he also has, on the other side, not the healthiest personal relationships all the time.
Yeah, about gender, I thought it was interesting. I mean, this is based on his life, so this is not something that they produced, and set up this way. But the fact that the mom was addicted to drugs, I thought that was they switched it up. Again, his real experience, but we don't see that often, right? We often think that it's the male figure in the household, or that somehow it's more acceptable for men to be, addicted to alcohol or drugs, right? And in this case, it was a female. I'm not sure if she had some kind of like disability or developmental delays, but it sounded like she was struggling with some things. And it never came out to light. But she was struggling with some things, and, you don't have to justify a drug addiction. It's a drug addiction. But it was interesting to see a female, struggling with this, and how that was highlighted. And also, again, for folks that don't ordinarily, I empathize with that experience. I think you can see it, in the docuseries, right? That, he needed his mom. His mom was addicted to drugs. And, there's a part of you that, says, well, how dare she? She's the mother figure. Well, where does that come from, right? Like gender constructs that make us feel like women should be more responsible than men, for example, right? And here we have a female who's addicted. And, I wonder how much of the audience empathized with her or demonized her because she was a female. And it
would be interesting to see. Yeah.
Now Chapman has to go back and see the docu-series.
I do.
You turn it on tonight. You're not going to get the sleep you normally get. It is really compelling. It's really well done. He's got a real interesting story. The diaspora piece. At one point he's in the Bronx. One point he's in the Boston area. The whole binational thing. A big part of it's in Colombia, which is really interesting. What a beautiful city, Medellin. My God, the visual of it, the way they filmed it was really nice. But there's a lot to it. Nicky was really. I give him credit. He was real straight up. Obviously, a lot of it was favorable to him. I'm famous. I'm real good looking. All the women want me. I mean, there was a lot of keeping it real on that level too. But, I thought the piece around incarceration, I mean, there's a lot to it. I encourage people to watch it. It's a lot of fun. Obviously, if you're a fan, you're only going to be more of a fan. And if you're sort of agnostic, I encourage you, because even just as a standalone piece of art, it's very well done. I got to give, some of the girlfriend characters are sort of like IG model types. I didn't think they were very necessarily real talented people. They can act. Everyone act. There's very few like bad acting in it. I mean, it was very well done across the board. And I thought it was a real honest reflection of our community. So, and you're listening to Zoe Colon and Dr. DeShawn Chapman breaking down El Ganador. Got to watch represent for Nicky Jam. We got to get him on the show. I think I know someone.
Hey, let's
Somebody reached out to me earlier today who I think has a connect with the management. So anyway, we'll figure that out at another time. But as we wrap up this edition of the show, I want to remind people again that we want to thank Zoe and Dr. Chapman for being part of really this 2-week-long celebration that we're having, which is gonna go to a crescendo Thursday for our very special 7th anniversary show. I started this on an Easter Sunday in 2013. After a couple years of really saying, there's something there's something beyond what I do at my job and my personal life that I want to get our voice out there and sound what I want to do. But there's so many people, the Zoes and the DeShawns, that need a voice and need an opportunity. And it's to your point earlier, Doctor, that if the table's not there, we got to create it for ourselves and build our own base of power and raise our own voice. As Stacey Abrams was saying in the media, hell yeah, I'll be the vice president. But if I don't speak up as a black female, ain't nobody gonna give me the opportunity. So I gotta speak it into existence. So I think we all have to take that lesson. But let's as we wrap this up, Thursday night. Let me ask you, Doctor. Obviously, the guests are gonna be fun, but we're also gonna have a lot of people like Zoe, people that have contributed to the show. What are you looking forward to as a relatively new person to this experience? What are you looking forward to on Thursday's show about learning about the show, or what are you looking forward to seeing Thursday night?
The culture and the history lessons. Obviously, I'm not Latina. So as you guys are talking about Nicky Jam and you're relating, the reggaeton movement to hip hop, I'm learning the whole time. And I think that conversations like this are important to accompany documentaries like that. So you can get the inside perspective, that cultural perspective of what's actually happening. Because otherwise, I think you can view something from another culture and it just kind of reinforces whatever stereotypes or ideas you might have about that culture without opportunities like this to really break it down. So I'm looking forward to you all breaking it down for me.
No, and vice versa. We got a lot of learning to do. I think particularly the perspective of not only African-American leaders, but African-American educators in the South, because a lot of people don't understand that regional dynamic of, essentially the largest black communities in the country have relatively little political power because of the way the democratic process is set up in the southern states. And so, look at what your governor's doing now, this clown show of this administration in the state, on the state level, forget the national level, where people can't even rightfully get their unemployment. That is a total disgrace. And I don't know how people aren't rioting in the streets at this point over that. Yep. To be honest with you.
And intentionally set up from jump. That's
absolutely. We're going to keep talking about that. You're absolutely right about that. Zoe, Thursday night. First of all, I hope you make an appearance Thursday night, Zoe. But hope you get we're gonna have a lot of our regular contributors make an appearance. But what are you looking forward to on Thursday?
The anniversary episode, all of your guest appearances. Obviously, Frankie Negron. I'm sure he'll sing for us.
Oh yeah,
drop the lyrics.
He's not going to sing for me. He's going to sing for y'all. Let's keep it real. He's going to sing for Zoe, Christina. He's going to sing. He's going to hang out with me. But he's going to sing.
So this Thursday, April 30th at 8 p.m. We'll be celebrating Found in Translation, your 7 years. We're going to have the showcase of talent. I heard spoken word, right? I heard a number of different ways that we express our culture. And our
DeShawn. Hey, DeShawn, let me give DeShawn a little tip. DeShawn.
What's up?
I got this brother doing spoken word named Quan. Not only is he a hell of a spoken word guy, but he ain't bad to look at. So I just want to give you a heads up. This brother Quan is going to break it down.
All right, Quan. I'll let all my single ladies know.
You're my girl. I'm just letting you know.
I was gonna say she's married, but
okay, I'm just sharing information. You know what I'm saying? Whatever she does with her business, I'm just letting you know. We'll bring something for the sisters too. You know what I'm saying? Like he's very talented.
We appreciate that. Non-married, we appreciate it.
I can't do it. Vitamins for the eyes. That's what I say. Whether you can
yes.
Look them up on Instagram. But anyway, I'm sorry, Zoe, I cut you off. But hey, Zoe, I appreciate you being on this journey. And DeShawn is like, I'm like a college basketball recruiter. I recruit ballers all over the country, and I gotta go to gyms and beg them and talk to their parents. And Zoe, it took her about 6 years, but it was worth the wait. And
we had a conversation 6 years ago about this. So
yes, so
nice.
And so, but you're a big part of the family and the Found Translation movement. So always supported regardless if you were short or not, you always were very supportive. So we appreciate y'all, fan. We appreciate this conversation. Thank you, Dr. DeShawn Chapman.
Thanks for having me.
This is an important conversation. You got me thinking about, I think, Zoe, our next show, and I've been thinking about our dear friend, Shirley Santos in New Jersey. I know I was watching earlier. I think the next time you come up, we need to keep this education conversation going.
Yeah.
Yes.
Our dear friend, Jola Bendiga, Joanna Lopez in Central Florida. We need to get Joanna in this conversation, talking about, school. This is a street fight, school district to school district, to get access to education. In Philadelphia, they said, if you don't got Wi-Fi, you can park outside the school because the school's got Wi-Fi. Can you imagine?
Well, so part of the reason why I invited DeShawn is because, one, she's awesome, but two, she's a poderosa. I call her that all the time in Spanish, and she knows what I mean. So it's like badass women in education. She has her PhD. Like we need, and she's young, she's beautiful. Like we need people to see that, right? Like I can achieve that as well. I can accomplish that as well. I don't have to look a certain way or speak a certain way, or lose my swag, right? In order to pursue my dreams or, to attain, what do they call that again? The highest level of education, terminal degree.
Right?
Which is not
kills you to get it.
Right. So terminal is not the sexiest term, but it is the highest level of education you can get. Here you have, a woman of color, someone from Orlando, that's what we need to show, these faces, this diversity. And, I think it's powerful.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dr. DeShawn Chapman. You'll definitely be back. And, of course, thank you, my co-host and regular contributor, Zoe Cologne. We'll see everybody Thursday. We're going to keep the party going. And look out. Just stay on social media, fan, because you never know what else we're going to announce. And we're going to remind people about, really this is dedicated to all of you that have been part of this journey with me and validate the need to build their own table. So enjoy the rest of your week, fam. We'll see you Thursday and have a wonderful night.
All right. Thank you.
Good night.
Congratulations again.